Hi everyone, this is Yvonne Cortez and I'll be narrating my slideshow on the public sector, Yesterday's Theories Applied Today. There were a lot of theorists that contributed to the theories of public administration. The first part we'll start out with will be Wilson's dichotomy, and that's where Wilson had said that he needed to separate politics and the people who implement politics. So it was separated in the way that the people who were responsible for the politics part, their responsibilities consisted of making laws, legislature, all of that kind of stuff, the policies and procedures that you see. And then you had the people on the other end who were responsible for implementing the law. One of the examples that was given in the slides was that the people who implement the laws are not necessarily the people who create them. So the example that was used was a police officer. For my example, I wanted to go ahead and use the education system. When you have a superintendent that's over a school or over a county office in public admin, they don't necessarily have a hands-on approach on implementing the things that they'd like to see done in education. I also pointed out Ed Code. So I pulled Ed Code, which is actually the legislation that kind of talks about how education is carried out. And so it would be the superintendent's job to ensure that the schools are following Ed Code. Another example that I used at the bottom was the city planner. So you have this woman in the right-hand corner, and she's a city planner. She's not actually the person who made the decisions. She's just the person responsible for implementing and building the city and making it happen. On the next slide, I want to point out Taylor's scientific method. So when I watched all the lessons and kind of went through it, Taylor's scientific method was very formula based. In Taylor's theory, he thought that the more time his use of timing the employees would create more money for the employees, and so that was how he did it. The problem is and he considered that to be effective management. The thing was, it created stress on people. An example of that today that I used in the public sector, I actually picked out the County of Riverside County Administration Center, and the man next to him is somebody who works in the office. What happens is when you're administrating a program at this level using Taylor's scientific method, even though the employee is able to meet the minimum or the criteria, it doesn't always go without stress. And so that's the reason why I use this picture. The next one is Gulick's POSDCORB POSCORB. And so if you remember from the teachings, there was all these functions of a manager that Gulick said they were responsible for. When I looked at this and I just thought, wow, this list is exhaustive. They are responsible for budgets, for reporting, for hiring staff, for organizing, for coordinating. And I chose the little Q*bert icon up on the top left to point out, like Professor Sundstrom said, that the acronym was just horrible. So like how Q*bert makes those weird little noises in his whatever language he's talking when things go wrong, that was the first thing that came to mind for me. A good example of this in public administration would be this theory would not be effective. You can't have one person who's able to do all of these different jobs. I know, for example, in my place of employment, it doesn't happen. Everything is more broken down to where it's more specific, and the people who direct are not the people who manage, and they're not the people who coordinate. It's all a very complex system. But part of the functions, according to Gulick, was that they are responsible for all these areas. The next person was Weber's bureaucracy. So Weber had more of a hierarchical approach. He was more into policies and procedures, very impersonal with employees. Everything kind of had a flow. when we had that corruption that happened before, where people were just letting their friends get into government, he was actually the person who implemented or helped bring in the merit system principle, where people were actually brought in based on their qualifications, which was very different. One of the other things that he kind of emphasized was compliance. By having this kind of hierarchy and this structure, it allowed for people to kind of fit in where they need to fit in, but the job didn't necessarily rely on a person. So he kind of took a little bit of Taylor's theory, but he made it a little more stringent for himself. Next, there was Follett's leadership. She was actually the first woman theorist who came into play with her ideas, and she focused more on like social relationships, health and well-being. She actually, at the time, women weren't allowed to be in the public sector and do all of these things, and so she tested her theories among the poor people in her country where she lived. And one of the big things was, for her, she found that if people she got more productivity out of people by having places and recognizing the social and the human element to it. She was a strong advocate for like community centers because she knew relationship was critical. I think in today's public administration, this is probably most evident is when we come down to time to voting. Like, the people who have to administrate, they bring a lot of different people together. And so if you go to, like, if you've ever been to a polling center, one of the things that I see a lot is you have people talking to other people. Like, you randomly talk to these people that you've never seen or that you don't know. And so I think it provides an opportunity and kind of that sense of belonging as you're going in and casting your votes. And last, we have Simon's bounded rationality. So Simon looked at all of this and he was like, okay, you want to put these people in boxes and you want to have all these ideas, and in order to get to that, your logic to it doesn't make sense, because in order to understand that, you have to be able to get into a person's brain and understand the way that they think and what makes them make those logical decisions. The problem with everybody else's theory was that you can't, it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. And so those theories won't work when you're trying to tie them into like a reality thing. One of the pictures I used was the square peg going into the circle. It's not going to fit no matter how much. Another picture that I used was the lady that's observing this group of people, and that's what Simon actually focused on. He said you would need to observe the people in order to be able to determine how they made their decisions. And so his theory was a little bit different than everybody else's theory. But I think this is probably the most applicable, especially today. We see this a lot in any type of like organization where you have to do surveys. You need to kind of study and see how are the people responding. You have to not only create your theory, but you also have to be able to test it. And I think that's where Simon kind of came into play. So my closing remarks. For my closing slide, I went ahead and I put a unicorn and rainbow, because this reminds me, you know, life isn't a box. You know, there's elements to life where, you know, you have rainbows and you have unicorns, and one is tangible. It's something that you can see, and a unicorn is like an idea. So when I think of the theorists and how they're trying to apply these things to today, and how we do see so many of these principles operating, it just reminds me of the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And as I was putting this together, I just really thought that's exactly what it is. These are ideas, and yes, they may work somewhere over the rainbow, they may work under the rainbow, but again, they all start out like unicorns. They're merely ideas. Somebody came up with these theories, and until they're actually tested and applied and the results are proven, you have data that you can measure and show that this is, it actually works, I think that's when you can actually call something concrete. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I'll see you guys soon.